Hello everyone, welcome back to What If Deku Had a Werewolf Quirk. So let's get started. It's a couple of days after the USJ attack, and Izuku is heading back to his dorm room after visiting Recovery Girl. She wanted to have daily visits with him to see how his healing process was going. She informs him that he has finally reached the point where his injuries are fully healed. The only thing is that he's going to have residual scarring over his body from the severe damage that he took. But that as long as he's careful about how much strain he puts on his body, he should be able to deal with it in a very moderate way. Just to not put too much stress on himself and to be careful how far he pushes himself, because his body, even though healed, will still have residual problems with certain types of damage or being hit in certain spots. He understands and thanks her for the heads up. It's as he reaches his dorm room that he opens the door to find Uraraka. She has her UA uniform on and is sitting on the bed waiting for Izuku to come back. She grows a wide smile seeing her beloved Izuku, and he reciprocates the smile as he approaches her, and he sits next to her and pulls her into a hug. Izuku is happy to be back in his dorm room. The stress of the USJ attack has left him very anxious, but he decides that he's going to be better. He's going to train harder just so that he can protect the people who he cares about a lot. And it's at this point that Izuku begins to ask Uraraka if she's ready to head to class. She informs him that indeed she is ready and that all she has to do is grab her bag and they can walk to class together. Izuku scoops her up and grabs both of the bags and begins to carry her to class. Uraraka, while enjoying the treatment, is a bit flustered at all the eyes looking at the both of them as they pass by. She's not used to getting so many stares from a typical display between the two, but this is her Izuku. And if he feels like carrying her, then she's not going to fight it. She's going to accept it with open arms and just enjoy the moment. But nevertheless, they reach the class and they both take their seats. It's a couple minutes later when the homeroom teacher, Aizawa, enters the room in his caterpillar bag thing and begins to address the class about how they are going to continue with the sports festival. Now, the students begin to ask him if he's sure that he's going to be okay teaching class and if it's a good idea for them to do the sports festival. He tells the students that it would be very bad for the school to cancel such a well-renowned event in UA history. They always do the sports festival, and to cancel it just because they got attacked by villains would show a considerable amount of weakness. the students begin to become hyped up at the idea of the sports festival. While they're concerned about if they should still go through it and if their teacher is alright after the event, they're excited anyway and begin to talk amongst each other about the up-and-coming festival. Now, Izuku, being very antisocial, is kind of not talking very much. He's more preferring to kind of keep silent during the conversation, while Uraraka, on the other hand, begins to announce that she's going to do her best, which makes Deku laugh and giggle a little bit. Now, on the other hand, they all begin to group off into their own little groups as they begin to talk about how or what they expect out of the festival. After that, they all find themselves trying to leave the classroom, but then they find themselves blocked by students. Like, the entire hallway is just filled to the brim with students. And they aren't exactly sure what's going on when a couple of Class 1A suggests that maybe they're trying to get a look at the competition. And that's when a boy with shaggy purple hair who looks like he hasn't slept in days walks up to the door and begins basically talking a lot of crap and talking about how the students of 1A must think that they're high and mighty just because they fought villains. That they must think that they're all that. This kind of makes Deku a little bit upset that someone is downplaying the stress and fear that they had to all collectively go through together being attacked by the villains. On the other hand, Uraraka looks very, anxious. This doesn't sit well with Izuku. Izuku then turns to the purple boy and begins to tell him that if he is going to run his mouth, that he better put his money where his mouth is. Otherwise, he needs to leave. Uraraka is then flattered that her dear Izuku would stand up for her. She finds it very adorable and endearing. But on the other hand, Ida then walks over telling Izuku that he shouldn't be trying to piss off the competition and essentially begin a declaration of war before the sports festival even begins. Izuku then responds back to Ida that if they want to scope out the competition, then he says let them. But that if they're going to try and intimidate the students, then that just shows weakness and an inability to put their money where their mouth is and prove that they got any type of skill that would deem them able to even show good results in the sports festival. That they're not exactly showing a lot of promise if their only goal is to mouth off. Ida then backs up, having seen the point that Izuku is trying to get at. that without action, that all these students who are essentially scoping out their competition are mostly like just kind of all talk and no bite. Now, continuing from there, Izuku then goes up to Uraraka, and basically they begin to walk down the corridor as Izuku then sees All Might. And as he sees All Might, he then turns to Uraraka and asks her if she doesn't mind waiting for him in the cafeteria, that he has something that he needs to do really quick. Uraraka understands and then begins to go to the cafeteria with Ida. Now Izuku, when he sees All Might, he calls out to him, essentially telling All Might that he wants to talk to him about something important. All Might, not really knowing exactly why Izuku wants to talk to him, basically he just kind of walks over to Izuku and leisurely asks him, "Is there something you need, young Midoriya? Or young Izuku?" Deku, he looks at All Might and says, "Why, yes, I'd like to talk to you about this in private, if you may." All Might, not really seeing any reason to be suspicious of Izuku for wanting to talk to him, basically tells Izuku, "Sure, let's go to the teacher's lounge to talk." They both make their way to the teacher's lounge, and as they get there, Izuku closes the door behind him and looks at All Might. All Might is starting to become concerned as to why Izuku suddenly wants so much privacy to talk to him about something. That is until Izuku basically turns to All Might and says, "You can drop the you can change it into your skinny form now." All Might is shocked at the fact that one of his students has knowledge of his weakened state, I'll say. All Might then quickly counters back, "How do you know about that?" Izuku then responds to All Might saying that he had seen All Might, that All Might has this lingering smell of blood all over him, and that it wasn't exactly hard to put the pieces together that something was very wrong with All Might. All Might then begins to worry that his student has delicate information on him now and is going to essentially threaten him in some fashion. Izuku then reassures All Might that he's not there to threaten him or to blackmail him in any sense of the word, that he wants to talk to All Might about why he's injured and why he smells of old blood. All Might further asks exactly, besides the fact that he smells like blood, what gave him away. Izuku said that the fact that he smells like old blood in the exact same way whenever he's seen All Might both in his skinny form walking around posing as another teacher and as himself has kinda drastically opened his eyes to his secret. All Might hangs his head in shame, now realizing that essentially he was busted because of the fact that a student has a very sensitive sense of smell. Though Izuku says that he can't really blame himself because of the fact that it just so happened that he was able to kind of put this together, but that he needs to consider maybe figuring out a way to lessen the his scent trail by maybe asking the UA staff to maybe put something in his suit that might be able to cover up the smell of blood on his teaching uniform. All Might takes this to heart and says that he'll put consideration on it and ask Nezu about the idea. But in the meantime, Izuku asks exactly why he looks like this and that he expects an answer, because it's only fair since he's going to be keeping his secret from now on. Now, All Might, I'm going to say that having met the boy and seen the kind of person he is, All Might has a lot of faith in Izuku and has actually put a lot of stock into maybe making him his successor for One for All. Now, on the other hand, All Might didn't want to just kind of go with the first person he liked as whose character he kind of liked. He likes Izuku's kind of willingness to help others, but on the other hand, he wants to make sure that the person who he gives the quirk to has a strong will and is doing it for the kind of reasons that All Might had when he first started as the symbol of peace. So he then asks Izuku, "Tell me, young Izuku, exactly what kind of hero do you want to be?" Izuku tilts his head and simply responds, "The kind of hero that inspires others to be proud of their quirks and not feel ashamed that their quirk makes them look a certain way. That they don't that just because they look a certain way with their quirk doesn't mean that they're bad or that they deserve to be ridiculed for their quirk. That no matter what kind of quirk they have, that they can be a hero and that they should accept themselves for who they are." All Might was blown away by Izuku's answer. He could tell that the young man had a lot of heart, had a lot of, I'll say, compassion in his heart for those who had some similar background to him. All Might basically goes on the spiel about how he got his injury a long time ago, and about how essentially that he got into a fight with a villain that caused him to lose most of his stomach, and how now he's restricted to only being a hero for a certain amount of time a day. This intrigues Izuku as to exactly what kind of person could lay a scratch on the symbol of peace. Because despite Izuku essentially living the way he did for a long time, he still admires All Might, so it baffles him to think of what kind of freak of nature would be able to hurt All Might. Though, Izuku is not entirely interested in wasting his time, like essentially reflecting the past of something that happened so long ago, especially when it has no bearing in towards exactly what he does now. He only wants to move forward and to make sure that he's able to protect the people that he cares about and keep them safe. So Izuku asks All Might exactly how he plans to continue to be the symbol of peace when he's in such a state. All Might then reveals to him that he came to this school to essentially get himself a successor to be the next symbol of peace, since he knows that he's not going to be able to be the symbol of peace forever. That despite it being a very grim thought, that it's realistic and that he can't simply pretend that he'll never retire, especially at the rate that he's going. So he then looks at Izuku and tells him, what if I told you that, or what if I offered you a way to increase your power exponentially, and also tell you that I think that you should be the successor of being the next number one hero, the next symbol of peace. Izuku is honored by the offer from All Might, but asks him exactly how is All Might going to essentially help him to become the next symbol. All Might then laughs and says, well, young Izuku, I wish to give you my quirk. Izuku begins to freak out. He's like, excuse me, what? Give me your quirk. Exactly how does that work? Because in the entire within the entire existence of quirks, there has never been a quirk that is transferable. Then All Might tells Izuku that he's really good at spewing word garbage or word vomit. I can't remember which one it was. Anyway, so he tells Izuku that many have speculated exactly to what his quirk is, but he's always deflected the answer. And so he is going to tell Izuku what the true name of his quirk is, that being One for All. He then explains to Izuku that One for All is a sacred torch that is passed from person to person. One person improves the quirk before passing it on to another. All Might then continues by telling Izuku that in order for him to know whether he believes Izuku is worthy of his quirk or not, that he wants to see exactly how Izuku does during the sports festival. Essentially, he wants to see exactly what Izuku is capable of during the sports festival in order to figure out whether he believes Izuku has what it takes to basically be his successor. Now, Izuku is very, I'm going to say, intrigued by this offer. He likes the idea of essentially being the protege next, in line for symbol of peace. He likes the idea. It sounds pretty swell. So he obviously tells All Might that he would love to essentially prove himself worthy of being the next symbol of peace, and would be honored to accept his quirk if he's worthy, that is. All Might puts on a very big, wide smile and tells Izuku that he's looking forward to seeing what Izuku can do and seeing how far he can go. Izuku then essentially he leaves the teacher's lounge and then making his way towards the cafeteria. It's just as he gets there that he sees his dear Ochako, and he sits next to her, asking her if she had gotten anything for him while he was sorting out some business. She said that she got him his favorite, Ketsudan. And Izuku, his tail begins to wag back and forth as his water mouths from the idea of eating his favorite Ketsudan. And as him and Uraraka begin to eat the Ketsudan, it's at this moment that the pink girl with little yellow horns approaches the two little lovebirds and asks if they mind her sitting with them. Both of them essentially tell her that no, they don't mind if she wants to sit with them. And she asks if her friend can also sit with them. Them already having accepted her, they agreed to let her bring her other friends to come sit with them. So Mina basically, she looks over towards the boy with the spiky red hair that has two red horns, or two hair strands that are in the shape of horns, to come over and sit with her. The boy sits down and essentially he tells Izuku that he thought he was really manly, like the way that he fought that Nomu to help protect the teacher and to help the others. Izuku becomes a little bit embarrassed and says that it was nothing, that anyone would have helped. That he isn't that that he shouldn't be praised for doing the right thing. But Kirishima rebuttals by saying that he should be that he should get praised for helping Aizawa whenever he was in danger or in trouble, because that's something that most people would usually freeze at. That they'd say that they would have jumped in to help, but that most people would have just frozen in that situation. He says that he essentially still feels that he sometimes doesn't deserve to be in UA. Izuku then turns to him and says, "Of course you do. You passed the entrance exam just like anyone else. Why wouldn't you belong here? I mean, your quirk is super strong. It reminds me of that hero, Crimson Riot." Kirishima then lights up. He's like, "You know Crimson? You've heard of Crimson Riot? Riot? Most people don't even remember him, but he was one of my favorite heroes." Izuku says, of course he does. That he finds that old heroes had a lot of very strong morals, and that he looks up to heroes like Crimson Riot and All Might. Kirishima just begins to go on a tangent of how much he adores Crimson Riot, and as they begin to end that subject, Uraraka essentially looks over to Mina and asks exactly why the both of them have, or why Kirishima has horn shape, has his hair in the shape of horns, almost the same way as hers. Mina then pulls Kirishima in and says because they're horn buddies. Uraraka then looks at Izuku and then looks back at Mina and says, "Is there something between you two? Because something tells me that you're more than just horn buddies." Now, Mina, if it wasn't for the fact that her skin was already pink, she'd be a hue of red, while Kirishima just has no defense against that and is a shade of red. He's like, what do you mean? She's just a friend. I doubt that Mina thinks anything of me other than the fact that I'm her horn buddy. Mina then kind of looks at Kirishima and then looks away, but begins to then look down and twiddle with her fingers. And Izuku and Uraraka, they share a look and they're like, "Oh hell yeah, there is definitely something between these two right here." After the event has passed, they all gather into the classroom, and essentially Izuku, Mina, Kirishima, and Ida begin to talk about how they are going to prepare for the sports festival. Now, Izuku, essentially, he tells the others that him and Uraraka are more than likely going to do a lot of sparring in order to prepare themselves for anything acrobatic or combat wise that they may have to do during the festival. And it's at this time that a boy with the head of a raven and a girl with a frog-like tongue then begin to make their way towards them. Essentially, Izuku turns to them and asks them if they need something. Sue and Tokoyami then introduce themselves and explain that, or Sue introduces herself to Uraraka, but Tokoyami introduces himself to the others and they both ask if they're talking about doing some training for the sports festival. They all confirm, yes, that they all want to do some kind of training. Izuku essentially reiterating that him and Uraraka are going to do some sparring together. It's at this moment that Mina, Kirishima, Tokoyami, and Sue ask if they would mind if they join them to prepare for the sports festival. Izuku and Uraraka look towards each other, and just by sharing that one glance, they both come to a mutual agreement to allow them to train with them. Now, it's at this moment that they all then go to their homeroom teacher and ask if they can have permission to train on one of the UA training fields. He essentially goes through which one they would like, and after they all essentially go through which one they could use or they want to use, they all begin to make their way towards the training field, and when they get there, Izuku then asks all of them, like, to explain their quirks so that they can all understand, like, what they're going up against, and so that anyone who has an idea might be able to help the others figure out how to improve the quirk. Now, Izuku, wanting to lead by example, he explains to his group that his quirk is called werewolf. That his ability allows him to essentially shift between different forms in order to, like, essentially give him an edge and advantage in certain areas. That so far he has only 2 forms, but that he's sure that with training and with a lot more practice towards, like, learning how to use his quirk, he might be able to access different forms. The forms that he has so far are his hybrid form and his pure werewolf form. The others are just so intrigued as to the versatility of his quirk and exactly, like, what he's able to do with it. He also tells them that depending on which form he uses, that it kind of gives him a power boost, and that, like, being a werewolf essentially gives him, like, regenerative abilities where he's able to have superhuman healing, and that it also offers him like superhuman strength, along with the added bonus of having claws and razor sharp teeth provided by the actual, like, wolf aspect of his quirk. And then on the other hand, that it also allows him to basically, like, have more range of mobility. Kirishima just pops in front of him and says, "Man, if there was a quirk that symbolized the essence of manly, your quirk would be considered the manliest." Izuku is kind of is kind of shy about it and a little embarrassed that someone would, like, praise his quirk so much. But then the others begin to explain their quirks. Uraraka obviously explaining how she's able to make anything she touches with the little paw pads on her fingers float. Like, it has zero and give it 0 gravity, but that she has a maximum, like, limit of 3 tons, I believe. Kirishima goes next, explaining that his quirk allows him to harden his body almost to like a rock, like a kind of durability where, like, where physical blows are not able to hurt him, but that if hit with enough force that it could crack the hardening, but though it does very little damage, but that he is still, like, vulnerable towards, like, element type based attacks. Mina goes next and explains that her quirk allows her to basically shoot out acid out of her body, and that she's also able to kind of, like, change the amount of acidity to it and can make it as thick as jelly, or as or have the consistency of water, where it just, like, where it's able to, like, flow very naturally. Izuku is very intrigued by this, and And as he looks towards Tokoyami basically explains that his quirk is a sentient quirk that allows him to basically have a secondary creature live inside of him called Dark Shadow. And that Dark Shadow has its own emotions and feelings, but that Dark Shadow's power grows whenever he's in darker areas, and that it gets weaker and more timid when in the light. Finally, we go to Sue. She basically explains that her quirk allows her to basically be a frog. That anything a frog can do, she can do. Also that apparently she can secrete a toxin out of her body or something like that. But as Izuku is listening to this, he's filing away all the little explanations in his head, basically calculating exactly good ways to counter the quirk, good ways to improve it, and the best ways to to make the best out of it. Granted, in this version, Izuku doesn't have his notebooks. All he has is his mind. So basically, having no notebooks, but having his incredible genius, the inside of his head is like a filing cabinet full of knowledge that also allows him to quickly and accurately analyze a quirk and come up with countermeasures for it instantly, or almost instantly. This is also improved by his battle instinct as well. After they all basically introduce what their quirks can do, Izuku basically goes on one of his mumbling tangents about how each of them could more than likely prepare their quirk for the future. But that he wants them to all fight him individually to see exactly on what level they're on. Now, Izuku has already fought with Uraraka, so he basically wants the others to come at him in a one-on-one spar to see exactly what they have and to figure out what they've got going for them. Also, if you're wondering why I didn't explain Ida, it's because I'm taking too long on the explanations, and it's because his quirk is self-explanatory. So, anyway, he begins by having Ida fight with him, and they basically lay down some ground rules that the fight goes until the other submits, and that they are not allowed to fatally injure the other, only to immobilize or and if the opponent is basically asks to stop, that's the end of the match. They basically all consent to the conditions, and it begins with Ida. Ida, essentially, he gets into place, and Izuku shifts into his hybrid form. And as they're all marveling at Izuku's stature, Uraraka basically signals for them to start. Now Ida, he takes off towards Izuku and begins trying to circle around him, looking for any kind of openings in order to strike him. But Izuku is counting on Ida trying to overcompensate for his lack of combat skill with speed alone. He basically wants to beat the stuck up out of Ida and get him to loosen up by being more brash and more combat oriented instead of too logical. So Izuku waits for Ida to make the first move, but as Ida is basically running around Izuku in a circle, Izuku is carefully listening for any hint of Ida coming at him. And as Ida deviates from his path and begins to launch an attack at Izuku from his blind spot, Izuku basically he ducks his head down, and as Ida is passing over him, Izuku grabs Ida by the back of his collar and slams him into the ground. Ida then has the wind knocked out of him, and Izuku basically puts his claws to Ida's neck and says, "Do you submit?" Ida says he doesn't, and then kicks Izuku's hand away from him before using his hands to push off of the ground and kick Izuku in the side of the head, making him basically stagger towards his left away from Ida. And Ida, taking another opportunity to try and charge, he goes for another kick, but Izuku grabs him by the leg and throws him away, before then going on all fours and charging at Ida. Ida tries to dodge out of the way, but Izuku is preemptively counting on Ida to try and move to the side, so he is able to predict which direction Ida is going to start to move towards, and changes his trajectory to basically catch Ida and slam him back into the ground again. Ida, after taking a mighty thrashing, basically sits up, and Izuku offers him a hand, saying that telling Ida that he needs to focus on trying to be more of maybe kickboxing, and whenever he, instead of just using his engines to just run around the enemy or to just be super fast, that he should learn to basically learn boxing, or more precisely kickboxing, and use the engines for more of an increase in attack speed overall. And that he needs to lighten up on his strict behavior and just try and become more relaxed, more loosened up, because his logical mind is working against him and preventing him from taking advantage of the situation. That anything in your surroundings can be used as a weapon. Ida understands that his way of just trying to logic his way through a fight might not work all the time, and he appreciates Izuku's input. The next person to try and fight Izuku is Tsuyu. Now, Izuku, basically, he goes back into his regular form since he wants to get a better feel on exactly how Tsuyu's quirk works first, because Izuku was basically able to figure out how he expected Ida to move just by analyzing his quirk, but he wants a real experience to see just what Tsuyu has. He wants to give her a bit more of a chance, plus him being too bulky might work against him, is what he feels in his heart. So essentially he has Tsuyu fight him while he's in his base form. Uraraka basically calls for them to begin, and Izuku gets into a stance and is watching Tsuyu very closely to see what she'll do next. They both begin to stare each other down, and in that moment, Tsuyu basically, she shoots her tongue out, like, to try and wrap around Izuku's leg in an attempt to catch him. And while trying to do that, Izuku, like, sees it coming, but is a little bit slow to the draw to figure out how to get out of her tongue. Now, he doesn't exactly want to do direct damage to her tongue, so instead he uses it as a leverage and actually like yanks on his leg fast to pull Tsuyu towards him. And when she's coming towards him, he grabs her and essentially like tries to pin her to the ground, but before he can like put her into a pinning position, she flips around and gears her legs up to kick him away from her, which launches him a little bit into the air before she kind of jumps into the air with both her legs cocked back and delivers a double kick to his back, knocking a little bit of the air out of his lungs. And as he's coming down, he basically shifts his arm to basically break his fall before launching off the ground towards her, sweeping her legs out from under her and really pinning her this time. He tells Tsuyu that her form is excellent, that she needs to figure out other ways to apply her quirk in different fashions. That it was a very smart move to use her legs to attack him, and that she should probably come up with different ways to use her legs to kick away the enemies. And that maybe studying the way that Mirko fights might actually do her some good. Tsuyu is actually happy for the advice and takes it to heart, especially the Mirko part, helping her to improve the way she kicks. Now, after that, then we get to Tokoyami. I'm going to say that he fights Tokoyami in his base form as well. Now, I'm also going to say that since they're on a training ground, I'm going to say maybe the gym. It's not entirely bright in there, and Izuku wants to see what Tokoyami can really do, so he has them dim the lights a bit so that Dark Shadow is a lot stronger. And he goes into his shifted form, or hybrid form, and Uraraka basically starts the match. And Tokoyami sends Dark Shadow out to fight with Izuku. Izuku, seeing the black mass spawn out of Tokoyami's back and shoot towards him, he's taken by surprise and then begins to try and figure out exactly how this thing works. It interlocks its fingers with Izuku, and Izuku finds that it has a lot of actual body strength to it, which he finds intriguing. But anytime that he tries to use his claws, that it doesn't seem to do damage to Dark Shadow. That he's able to hit the quirk, but that doing any kind of slashing attacks doesn't exactly do much to it. He supposes maybe because of the fact that it's actually a shadow, and that might be contributing to the inability to be cut. Now, as he's trying to basically push back Dark Shadow, he's realizing that Tokoyami isn't really doing much in this situation. That he's just kind of standing there and telling Dark Shadow what to do. Dark Shadow sends Izuku up into the air, and it's at this moment that Izuku figures out exactly how he's going to defeat Tokoyami. As he's beginning to fall out of the air, he sees Dark Shadow like rising up into the air to try and strike back at him. But as Dark Shadow throws a punch, Izuku bats the hand away and punches Dark Shadow right in the beak, knocking it like away from Tokoyami. And Izuku, basically taking the opportunity, begins to use Dark Shadow like a raceway and run down the length of Dark Shadow's body, making him his way to Tokoyami, where he then pins Tokoyami down by putting his hand around Tokoyami's neck and holding him tight to the ground. And as he does this, he asks Tokoyami, does he submit? Tokoyami says that he surrenders. And Izuku takes his hand off of him and backs up. Izuku tells Tokoyami that he needs to consider maybe learning to be more physical and not just rely solely on Dark Shadow. That in situations like a bright sunny day, that it'd be better for him to have like physical capabilities of his own and not just rely on his quirk. Because if it's really bright outside, that Dark Shadow's not going to be able to do anything. So he needs to learn physical combat. And Tokoyami, he appreciates the advice and decides that he's going to try and take that to heart and learn other ways so that he doesn't have to rely on Dark Shadow prominently just to win a fight. Now, I'm going to say that the next person that Izuku fights is going to be Mina. But this fight, I'm going to say that it's not going to go very well, but I'm going to go with it anyway. Mina and Izuku get into into their positions, and Izuku goes into his base form, not seeing a reason to use all that power against Mina. So they get in their positions, and Uraraka calls for them to begin. Izuku then charges forwards towards Mina, and as he's about to reach her, he sees her basically jump to the side and begin to skate on her acid, almost like she's wearing roller skates, which he finds very clever. He sees that she has obviously put a lot of thought into how she wants to use her quirk. As he is basically trying to pursue after her to land a hit on her, he sees that she, alongside using the acid on her feet to skate around, that she is preemptively calculating how much acid to use in order to attack back at Izuku. As she sends a decent-sized glob of acid towards Izuku, he ducks past it and then closes in to chop her abdomen. But she's able to jump over him and send a glob of acid at his back, which mildly burns, but it's not enough to cause severe damage or really burn to burn any of the clothes off of his back. He then flips back around and he loses, and he gets rid of the shirt on his back and throws it to the side, revealing all his rippling biceps, triceps, and his chiseled abs. This making Mina kind of like lose her balance a little bit because she wasn't expecting Izuku to be super ripped. Kirishima on the sideline says, "That's really manly. I want you to share your workout regimen with me sometime." Izuku kind of like loses focus in the moment before then gathering himself back together and charging towards Mina again. And as while she's still trying to kind of like collect her bearings because she wasn't expecting him to just suddenly take his shirt off, he then kind of like closes in and delivers a decisive chop to her side, which then kind of like makes her recoil and like stumble on the ground before trying to charge back at him with more acid globs in her hand, trying to kind of like aim them towards his feet and his head. But he's able to decisively dive towards her to avoid the globs while effectively like aiming for a vital point to like hook his hand around her waist and then pin her to the ground. He gives Mina props for her ability to effectively use her quirk in such a situation, and for her ability to kind of like use like all of her resources in order to fight. But on top of that, he also admires her ability to think on the fly and come up with creative ways to help maneuver herself in the area. He doesn't have a lot of tips for her, but he does offer that she might want to consider like not just throwing acid everywhere, but to kind of like coat her hands in a type of acid, that way that when she's punching, that the acid around her hands works almost like boxing gloves. Not that they're hard or anything, but that anywhere she punches will end up causing a severe burn. She likes the idea, and then basically like goes back to the group, whereas the final match between Izuku and then Kirishima will soon begin. Kirishima and Izuku basically they get in their places, and Uraka calls for the match to begin. And as they start, Izuku shifts into his hybrid form and tells Kirishima that he wants to see him at his best and that he's not going to hold back on him. That this is going to be a fight between men. And he wants Kirishima to show him like how the length of his will and how strong his drive to get better and become a better hero is. Kirishima gets super psyched and hype, and as they start charging towards each other, Izuku rears back his right arm to deliver a mighty punch towards Kirishima, and Kirishima then sends a right towards Izuku, but Kirishima hardens his whole body to take the impact of Izuku's punch and deliver some back. But Kirishima wasn't expecting Izuku's punch to have so much force behind it, that when his punch hit Izuku, that the sheer pressure from Izuku's strike would send him flying backwards, effectively breaking some of his hardening. But Kirishima got back up and began to charge towards Izuku while holding his hardening. Izuku could see that he was sluggish now. He didn't seem like he was as fast. He told himself that he would basically like bring this up with Kirishima after the fight. But as Kirishima charged towards him, Izuku jumped past him and slashed at his back, which was hardened, so it didn't really do much. But Kirishima wasn't exactly fast enough to turn around in the meantime. But he was able to use the moment that Izuku was close to cock back his left hand and punch Izuku in the bottom of the jaw, sending him flying backwards. Izuku stood up and proceeded to turn to his side while spitting a little bit of blood out of his mouth. He began to laugh, shouting towards Kirishima, "Now that's what I like! Come on, Kirishima, show me more of that drive. Show me how much you want to do this. Show me how deep your determination to become a hero truly is." Kirishima gets excited and Izuku runs full speed on all fours towards Kirishima, basically gathering up the momentum with his strike. And as he leaps towards Kirishima, he punches Kirishima, and in an attempt to defend, Kirishima puts up both of his arms in a cross X position in order to block the attack. His attempt to block it seems to be doing well until he begins to pant, and the hardening quirk then dissipates, sending him flying, and it forces him to hit a wall. Izuku gets worried and kind of runs over to Kirishima asking if he's okay. Kirishima says that yes, he is, but that having his hardening all over his body wore him out a little bit too fast. Is basically Uraraka called the match early, and Izuku basically told Kirishima that he sees a lot of determination and that he believes that with enough training that he's going to be one of the best heroes in the world, in his opinion. Kirishima is delighted to hear someone say that they believe in him so much. And Deku then explains to Kirishima that he saw a lot of stuff that he needs to work on, but that other than that Kirishima is on his way to becoming pretty strong. He tells Kirishima that he noticed that whenever he uses his quirk, that his whole body slows down, and that his reaction time is very sluggish. Kirishima kind of looks at Izuku a little bit ashamed, confessing that he barely started training his quirk not too long before trying out for UA. Izuku then tells Kirishima that for not having his quirk for very long before, or using his quirk for very long before the entrance exam, and barely having enough time to try and perfect it, that he's very strong, and that Izuku sees him going a very long way with his development of his quirk, but that instead of putting the quirk throughout his entire body, that he should only focus on hardening certain parts of his body, more precisely around mainly his fists, and his chest and back, and maybe his head, not to worry about having to harden his legs. Kirishima takes this to heart and sees where Izuku's coming from. That applying the quirk to certain parts of his body may lessen the strain he puts on himself and offer a better way of maximizing his speed while also improving his defense and attack in specific spots. Kirishima then basically takes Izuku's hand, and Izuku helps him up. this basically goes on for the next week or so as they all train and spar and become close to one another as the sports festival gets closer. I think I'm going to stop the part right here. I hope you all enjoyed, and don't forget, the shadows are watching.